The Water Committee this morning. First off, we have meetings from our committee meeting on February 6th. Are there any minutes? I'm sorry. Is there any corrections or additions to those minutes or a motion for approval?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the minutes as prepared.
Okay, is there a second? Representative Stocksdale. All those in favor say aye. 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 All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we will open a hearing on House Bill 2113 for the purpose of hearing a great many people here, looks like. First off, we have the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. Yes, I'm sorry. Kyle, would you please preview us first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. New Section 1 of House Bill 2113 would establish the State Conservation Fund in the State Treasury. Expenditures from the State Conservation Fund would be required to be made for the financing of conservation programs. On July 1st, 2025, and each July 1st thereafter, or as soon as monies are made available, the Director of Accounts and Reports would transfer $5 million from the State General Fund to the new State Conservation Fund. Monies transferred to the State Conservation Fund would be used for two purposes. One, to provide a match of state monies on a basis of $2 of state monies to $1 of non-state or private monies, and two, to fund or provide domestic water quality sampling. The Division of Conservation within the Kansas Department of Agriculture would be required to provide aggregate data generated from any domestic water quality sampling to the State Geological Survey. The division would be required to adopt rules and regulations to administer the expending of monies from the State Conservation Fund. The division would also be required to solicit input and facilitate public comment from industry members and stakeholders in developing such rules and regulations. Section 2 of the bill concerns enhanced transfers. It would state that on July 1st, 2025, and also 26 and 27, the Director of Accounts and Reports shall transfer $55 million from the State General Fund to the State Water Plan Fund. Of that amount each fiscal year, $7 million would be transferred from the State Water Plan Fund to the Water Technical Assistance Fund, and $18 million would be transferred from the State Water Plan Fund to the Water Projects Grant Fund. The section would still be set to expire on July 1st, 2028. House Bill 2113 would become effective upon publication in the Register. With that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
Any questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify for the committee, the conservation districts currently receive funding from the State Water Plan Fund. Is that correct? So this would be changing that by creating a state conservation fund, and that's how they would be funded. Is that correct?
I would have to defer maybe to the chairman if this is in addition to or in lieu of.
The intent of the bill was the 2-to-1 match to be handled in the same manner that the 1-to-1 match has in the past. And from what I can tell, it has come out of the Kansas Water Office. And that was my question for Kyle, a month and a half ago or more. And you went back and did some research, I believe. And anyway, our intent was to do it in the same manner as it has been in the past and not to create anything new. And for the committee's understanding here, I've been told since that $5 million is more than enough. I have an amendment on this bill to reduce it to 2.5, just so you guys know where we're headed or what's going to be offered here.
And I would just add that on page 1 of the bill, line 28, it does say that monies credited to the State Conservation Fund would be used to supplement existing appropriations, and they wouldn't be used to supplant State General Fund or Special Revenue Fund appropriations to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, AKA the division.
And then may I ask one more question? So as part of those monies, they can also fund or provide domestic water quality sampling. And I know that would be like on a voluntary basis. Is there any specification of who will be doing that sampling? Is that, because KDHE does a lot of that, I know, so I'm just wondering if that would be in partnership with them or if it's separate.
I think it's open to either funding a third party or at the discretion of the division.
Okay, great, thank you.
Representative Fairchild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was actually the same question I was going to ask, just about the State Conservation Fund and if that was a different fund than we had been using.
I believe it's entirely different than the one that's been discussed in the department or Ag Committee about the large $60 million. This is entirely different. The intent was for years, the state has offered a one-to-one match if conservation districts within each county up to $25,000. And so many of these smaller rural conservation districts get about $50,000 a year for an entire budget to hire one employee who normally sits in the front desk of the NRCS office. The intent of this bill on the water quality thing was that they either provide it if it isn't happening currently in their counties, or if it's the health department or KDHE or someone else. But I was hoping that they would be able to report aggregate data from their area, and normally it's a county, to the Geological Survey Group for their water quality database. So currently they reported the other day they have 150 data points, which are small municipals out there. If you can add the domestic wells to that, I think we could easily get to another 1,000. That would greatly enhance that database, and that was the intent of this bill, a portion of it. Any further questions? Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for the sake of the committee, this sunsets at the same time as House Bill 2302, is that correct?
Section 2 contains the same sunset for 2028, but the first section does not contain an expiration date.
Oh, okay, thank you. And that's the Conservation District section? Okay, thanks.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Kyle. Heather, could you give us a fiscal note on this one? It's there. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not very organized this morning.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. All right, Mr. Chair, the fiscal note for House Bill 2113 looks like, okay. The Department of Health and Environment indicates the bill would increase expenditures from the State Water Plan Fund by $20 million, with $8 million for the grant programs of the Kansas Water Office, and the remaining $12 million for overall state water plan funding going to various agencies based on programs, projects, and initiatives. This $20 million would be in addition to the existing $35 million from the State General Fund. The department indicates that a portion of the transferred funds would be allocated to and expended by KDHE for water projects tied to the implementation of principles and goals of the Kansas Water Plan. But a precise fiscal effect on the agency cannot be estimated. The Department of Agriculture indicates the bill would increase expenditures by a little over $5 million beginning in fiscal year 2026. Of this amount, $5 million would be for the transfer to the State Conservation Fund to be used for matching funds for domestic water quality sampling. The department also indicates it would require one position to manage the program at an estimated cost of about $95,000, including $55,000 for salary, $25,000 for fringe benefits, and $10,000 for supplies, and $5,000 for travel. The Water Office indicates enactment of the bill would result in additional grant administration needs and would require an additional staff member, which could be funded within existing resources. The office indicates that a portion of the additional funding transferred to the State Water Plan Fund would be allocated to the office, which could be administered within existing resources. And then there's a note about the FY 2026 Governor's Budget Report. That includes a transfer from the State General Fund to the State Water Plan Fund for FY 26, totaling $35 million, in transfers from the State Water Plan Fund to the Water Technical Assistance Fund and the Water Projects Grant Fund, totaling $7 million and $19 million respectively. The governor's budget also includes a transfer of $30 million from the accrued interest in the Budget Stabilization Fund to the State Water Plan Fund.
Any questions? Okay. We will start with proponents giving oral testimony, and Dan Meyerhoff cannot make it today, so we have a substitute off the bench, Sean Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Sean Miller, here representing the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. First off, I want to really express my appreciation to the reviser and research. When you started to call on me first, I got a little panicky, and I think they just did most of my work. But I do appreciate that overview. I'm here to testify in favor of House Bill 2113. I'm going to limit most of my discussion to Section 1 and the intent of Section 1, but we do support the remainder of the bill as well. You have my written testimony. I don't, so I'm not going to read it. You don't have to put up with that. But I would like to give you just a little bit of a brief background on conservation districts, what they do, how they operate. First off, we have a conservation district in all 105 counties. So I love working with them because it's one of the few folks where I can say, I know you have constituents in so-and-so's district. Please go talk to the representative. In addition to those conservation districts in all 105 counties, they are governed by a volunteer elected local board of 5 people. So you have 5 people in each of the county you represent that serve on the board that direct the conservation district in their activities. And the conservation district, quite frankly, is like your small town Main Street front door, right? Let's assume I have a piece of ground and I have problems on that ground. That's not a hypothetical because I do, and there's lots of problems. It's how do I improve my grass for cattle? How do I get an erosion problem dealt with? And I begin to pull my hair out, as you can tell, because there's so many problems that I don't know where to start. So what I do is I go to the conservation district. They're usually co-located with the NRCS, and I yell, Terry, please help me. What do I do? And Terry says, Sean, take a real deep breath, calm down. This problem is fixed by this program. This problem can help by this program. This problem is a personal one, you're on your own, but this problem can be fixed by EQIP. And she sort of helps connect me and walk me through the various federal, private, state, and local opportunities that are there to try to address those issues, from erosion to cover cropping to help soil health, sedimentation issues, you name it. So they're sort of the one-stop shop, if you will. The way those funded, the chairman mentioned it earlier, is currently in statute. I'm going to be a little weird here for a minute. Currently in statute, it's a 1-to-1 match of up to $25,000 in state funding. So if my county puts in $25,000, the state will match up to $25,000, and we have $50,000 to run that office. That's not program funds. That's not money going into shrubs or grass. That is hiring a person, keeping them on staff, hopefully maybe getting them a little bit of health insurance. In most cases, that's not the case. And because of that, what we have seen is over about the last 5 years, we have turned over 70 of those 105 positions because they can make more almost anywhere else. And so a couple of years ago, we started talking at our board. We started talking with some representatives and some senators and said, how do we stop this constant churn and turnover of district managers? We need to find a way to get them some health care. And that led to what the bill that we're looking at in front of us today is. And that is a 2-to-1 state match capped at $50,000. So it limits our total liability. So if a county puts in $25,000, funding pending, right? It still has to go through the state budget. The state could put in up to $50,000. That gets us to a $75,000 total, much more likely that we can keep an office staff up and running and keep that person in there. So I think the $5 million that is in the bill was clarified that is to supplement, not to supplant. Right now, we're moving through the budget process. As the minority member mentioned, this is historically been funded from the State Water Plan Fund. So we have money in the State Water Plan Fund right now that goes to aid to conservation districts. That's the line item you see. That is transferred over to the Division of Conservation within KDA. I am, quite frankly, source agnostic. Like wherever the money comes from, we need the money to run the programs, whether it comes from a $5 million chunk in this conservation fund, whether it's State Water Plan Fund, however it moves. We have worked great with all of the different parties that you've talked about so far, and I don't have any concerns with that. I do want to tell you that the max total amount that we can use because of the cap, right, is $5.25 million. So if we have $3.5 or $5 million from the State Water Plan Fund and this $5 million comes in, we can't magically use 8.5 or 10. We're still going to be capped at that 5.25. So that kind of limits the exposure for the state. And then the remainder of that money, as the bill is written, I think could go to domestic water quality assessments or could just sit there and be reappropriated or lapsed next year. I think that's enough about Section 1. The remainder of the bill, the governor has had plans, the chairman has had plans, the water authority has had plans this year. I think there's a lot of plans on we need more money for water programs and for water planning, and we support all of the above on that. We have a lot of needs across the state. The things that we see in the Verdigris Basin in southeast Kansas are very different than we see in the upper Republican and northwest Kansas, and so we need some flexibility there to deal with different issues, but we are ready and more than happy to help with any of those as we can, and we do have resources, again, as I'll remind you, in 105 counties, so I think we're uniquely situated to help with that. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Any questions at this time? Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sean, for the spot-on testimony. I served as chair of the Montgomery County Conservation District for 6 years, and during that time, we went through 3 managers, simply for the reasons what you said. We debated whether to involve them in capers, which is, once you make that decision, you can't, it's irreversible, which would have been a good retention tool. And it's been a huge problem to where a lot of times the chair would have to come in and run the operation, and I certainly did not like that. I learned a lot, but I had another operation to run of my own private thing, so it's spot on. This is long overdue, and I certainly am going to support this bill. Thank you for your testimony.
Sean, how long has this one-to-one match been on statutes?
One-to-one match has been in for about 20 years right now. Prior to that, it was $10,000 at a one-to-one match. So the one-to-one match has been in for a long time, but the 10 became 25 in about 2007. So as you can tell, a lot of things have increased in cost since then. And so we're at the point again where we're really struggling to keep those staff and really need to be able to maintain some consistency there.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Next, we have Aaron Perpelka with the Kansas Livestock Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Aaron Popelk with the Kansas Livestock Association, and I will be very brief. We support House Bill 2113 as it builds on kind of the historic funding provided by 2302. I know there's a lot of folks here who have different interests. I just want to touch on our little piece in the livestock sector that we think has been a success under 2302 and shows some of the need. One of the things in 2302 that we help ask for is to use the livestock fees, which if you look at water rights, livestock's one of the few that pays direct fees every year, and it's a little over $500,000. And we asked if we could use those for a conservation program. And we were able to do that this year with Division of Conservation. And at first we were a little concerned, are we gonna have enough applications there for the money? And when it came in, there was 3 times the need of the actual funds. And so I'm just using that as an instance in our little piece, which probably only amounts to $1.5 million, but there is a need. There is a need to try and do some of these conservation projects, and so that's why we support the bill. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Next, we have Josh Spotty with Kansas Municipal Utilities.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. The Kansas Municipal Utilities, of course, is a statewide association that manages all the electric, water, and wastewater and natural gas for municipally owned utilities in the state of Kansas. And for those of you on Ag and Natural Resources, yesterday you got fire and brimstone, Josh. Today it's sort of much more subdued, Josh, but we just want to add our voice and make sure we that we appropriately commend the committee for continuing to work on building 2302 and moving it forward, because you've had multiple reports before this committee about the need that exists across the state, particularly in smaller communities, both having the capacity to put together proposals to fix their water systems and then seeing those through to fruition. And so we appreciate all the work the committee does and see the 2113 as a continuation of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Yesterday in committee, and I apologize for not being there. I had a family memorial service to attend. You mentioned some dusty plans that are on the shelf. Can you give us a real short, brief history of some of the long-term water plans?
I'm gonna take a sidestep here. There are other people in the room that can answer this better than I can, but there was a discussion yesterday. For those of you not on Ag and Natural Resources, there was discussion of a bill that would create a new task force, and there were comments coming from the committee, and that, you know, is this just yet another task force? And there, on this issue, maybe almost more than any other in the state, we have lots of history of task forces and lots of hours of sitting in uncomfortable chairs, and it can seem like they don't get anything done. But we were talking about Governor Brownback's Blue Ribbon Task Force on Water, which met in the mid-20-teens, and everybody said, well, that didn't produce anything, but I made sure that the Ag and Natural Resources Committee understood it did produce a couple of things. First of all, it created a lot of the framework behind what 2302 did, which was creating pots of money that could support, in our case, of course, communities, but as the Kansas Livestock Association just said, there are lots of entities that need some support in getting their water projects done, and it created those pots of money where the Blue Ribbon Task Force couldn't finish the job, which was that they just couldn't figure out how to fund it. And I didn't say this to the committee, and I would let others in the room that were actually on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. I just sat and attended as a spectator, but others could probably speak to it better than I can. But what I didn't tell the committee yesterday is there is value. This is a horrible paraphrase of Thomas Edison, but I think Edison once said, well, I've invented 100 ways how not to make a light bulb. And the Blue Ribbon Task Force vetted 100 different ways on how not to fund water long term. And there's value in that sometimes, going through that exercise of really exploring all the ideas. And even if you come to the end of them and are like, well, none of these really work, at least that work has been done so that when a future entity comes together to say, how do we fund these long term, they can look back at the work of the task force and say, well, they did look at all of these and they decided not to for XYZ reason.
Any further questions? Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Wendy Stark with Kansas League of Municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I actually moved that a little too low this time. Last time I was standing on my tippy toes and realized I could have moved it down. But thank you so much. I'm Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities. First of all, I would be remiss in not saying to anyone who was on this committee 2 years ago, thank you for House Bill 2302. It has made a difference in communities, and we see this bill as an expansion of that. Usually I'm very brief, but I would ask for just a few minutes for me to express the need that is out there. I looked at the Kansas Water Office website of all of the municipalities that have submitted applications. It goes from Timken, population 36, to Olathe, 147, 461. But if you bear with me for just a couple of minutes, I'd like to read off the cities that have submitted applications just in the first round. Allen, Anthony, Atchison, Atwood was awarded. Aurora, Belle Plaine, Bellevue, Beloit, Bentley, Byrne, awarded. Bird City, Blue Mound, Blue Rapids, Bonner Springs, Brewster, Burden, awarded. Burlington, Burr Oak, Caldwell, awarded. Caney, Canton, Cocker City, Centralia, Chanute, Chatopa, awarded. Cimarron, Coffeyville, Colby, Colwich, Cottonwood Falls, Cuba, Deerfield, awarded. Delia, Dexter, awarded. Downs, awarded. Edgerton, Effingham, awarded. El Dorado, Ellis, Ellsworth, Emmett, Emporia, Esmond, Fall River, Fontana, Formosa, Fowler, awarded. Frankfort, Fredonia, Garnett, Glen Elder, Goddard, Goodland, Gove City. Grainfield, Greeley, Greene, Haddam, Hamilton, Harper, Harveyville, awarded. Hayes, Hayesville, Harrington, Hill City. Holton, Humboldt, Hutchinson, Independence, Iola, BPU and KCK. Kensington, Lacine, La Harpe, Larned, Lenora, Leon, Leonardville, Lewis, Liberty, Lynn. Logan, awarded. Mahaska, Mankato, awarded. Maple Hill, Marion, Marysville, McDonald, awarded. McPherson, Milford, awarded. Miltonville, awarded. Moran, awarded. Narca, Neodesha, Ness City, North Newton, Nortonville, Oakley, Oberlin, Ogden, Olathe, Olsburg, Onega, Osborne, awarded. Oswego, Overbrook, Parsons, Paxico, awarded. Peabody, Perry, Plainville, Potwin, Pratt, Pretty Prairie, Protection, awarded. Quinamo, Quinter, Randolph, awarded. Rantoul, Reading, Republic, Rolla, Rossville, Russell, Scott City, Seneca, Severy, Spring Hill, St. George, St. Paul, awarded. Strong City, Sylvia, Tuscott, awarded. Timken, awarded. Tipton, Tribune, Troy, Utica, Valley Falls, Wakini, Wakefield, Wamego, Wakefield was awarded. Wamego, Washington, Waterville, awarded. Wellsville, West Mineral, Westmoreland, White Cloud, Williamsburg, awarded. Willowbrook, Wilson, and Winchester. This is very much needed to expand that funding. And what has happened is that we have had about 20% of those needs met. This will help reach those other needs. And again, thank you for 2302, and we strongly support House Bill 2113, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions at this time? Representative Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the present rate of funding, how long will it take to meet this need? And is this the most appropriate structure and plan to deal with this?
This has been a help. This is a start for some. Some of this is technical assistance where then those cities can apply for possibly some federal grants. So it's technical assistance as well as the infrastructure itself. Some of these cities through this process have then applied for federal grants. So I believe Caney is one of the cities I mentioned. They have received other grants, not from this fund, but since this process has started, this has helped them receive additional funding. So it is helpful. It's not going to solve all the problems.
May I have one more question? Thank you. How do we know then with this program, at the rate these systems are wearing out and failing, how do we know we're not using public money to award that to people who have not put investment into their systems, and then the systems that have put money in don't end up with any of this pot of money?
I can't completely answer that question, but what I can say is that there has been deferred maintenance with some cities, and some cities have done a good job keeping up. However, this is helping meet that gap, and I don't believe that this punishes cities who have been maintaining their systems. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience would like to tackle that question? For further discussion in the future, I guess. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Wendy. It was helpful to see the names of the cities and to hear them in terms of who has applied and who's been awarded and just the outstanding need. I was wondering if you might also be aware of an anecdote in terms of a city that was helped by these funds and how that has improved their water infrastructure systems?
I do not specifically, but I can reach out to some of those cities and see if I can provide that and share that with the committee.
Right. I think we got some written testimony from cities too. It's always good to hear, how those those dollars are impacting these cities on the ground. But yeah, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Representative Helwig?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. You read off a lot of names there of people that applied and people that were awarded. I don't have a calculator to kind of do that. Can you kind of give me a number amount of what was applied for and then what was awarded of a total?
On the website, I don't have what was applied for. I just see that the city submitted an application, and yes, they were awarded, and the amount if they were awarded, but I don't see if they were not awarded what that application amount was.
Okay, I was just curious about the gap there.
I do believe that in previous hearings, I believe that was $383 million that was applied for in that year. 300.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was looking at the annual report from the Water Office and the Kansas Water Authority. So it looks like under 2302, 309 applications were submitted, $380 million, equaling $380 million in total requests, and $18 million were available to award. So over, yeah, $380 million in outstanding or in total requests.
To further answer this question, I'll ask Connie Owens with the Kansas Water Office to come forward. I don't see Victoria with you this morning, but you can give us a brief overview of how this program, because it is administered by the Water Office, the municipalities get to see the results, but they don't see the process that they go through. So if you'll give us a brief overview in collaboration with KDHE, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Connie Owen, the Director of the Kansas Water Office, and the Water Office did divide and conquer this morning. We have a couple of different committee hearings to be paying attention to. So, am I not on? Is that better? I can hear the echo. So, a lot of questions were in there. Where would you like me to start? Because one thing I might share is all of you, as Representative Vaughn has mentioned, have a copy of the Water Authority's annual report. It's also on the Water Office website, and some of the quick and easily referenced information, all of this information about our grants is on our website. There is a map that is included in the annual report that identifies where the awards were given out in the first round of applications. The second round of applications is very close to those awards being announced, so stay tuned for those. But this helps you understand some of the geographic differences and some of the different kinds of things that have been requested. The process, I think, is that one of your questions, Mr. Chair? The process is that there is an application for technical assistance grants, and there is an application for water projects grants. Both of these kinds of grants were created under 2302 for the Water Office to develop and administer. And the applications are on our website. They are the simplest application for a grant you will ever see. It's maybe 1 page, 2 pages. It's very easy to access. Neither one of them requires any cost share whatsoever. And we developed it that way because we wanted it accessible. The whole point of these grant funds was to provide money to communities that didn't have the wherewithal to afford these services themselves. So the the technical assistance grants, of course, are for engineering, planning, grant writing, all of those kinds of things, sort of get in the game, identify what you need. And then the water projects grants are just what they say. They're to pay for repairs, infrastructure, building, water treatments, all kinds of water-related infrastructure. The eligible entities are municipalities and water-related districts. So in other words, rural water districts, they're for public water supply sources. Groundwater management districts are also eligible. So the process is when we developed the grant program, we had not been doing grants previously, and so we sought advice from Department of Commerce and others who had deep experience in doing grants. And what we did was we hired a consultant to help develop an evaluation process. So the statute itself, 2302, includes some priority steps, in other words, communities under 2,000, and some other various entities. Again, this is all listed on our website. It's also in the bill itself. We also had, with this consultant, developed a matrix for scoring because there was, we anticipated and did receive an absolute avalanche of applications. So to work our way through that, we had to come up with a consistent, transparent way to evaluate how were we going to give out very little money for a huge amount of ask. So our consultant helped with the scoring and created tiers of recommendations based on the different criteria that are in the statute. Also, this year, we learn as we go, criteria has been added that if this particular application is part of a regional approach, a regional solution, then we would want to know about that and prioritize that. Not every request can be, but in the first round, we realized there could be discrete particular communities that needed a huge amount of money. But maybe it would ultimately make more sense to do a regional solution instead of a lot of money here and a lot of money here and a lot of money there, when maybe we can sort of blend them together. For example, this was not a subject of a grant request, but with Caney, right? Their solution ended up being a regional solution with the connection and working with Coffeyville. So in the second round, we added, the opportunity for regionalization as a priority. So when the consultant goes through the matrix, gives us recommendations for tiers, then our grants team in our office reviews those and comes up with the ultimate awards based on what our consultant has said. But it is the director's final decision as to what awards are given out. And it's a bittersweet obligation because we know the people who get the awards desperately need them, but it's also very painful that we can't give them to everyone that we know desperately needs them. So we applaud this committee creating that pathway for assistance for communities and hope that that will continue. So are there further questions or aspects you'd like me to address, Mr. Chair?
Representative Pickert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Connie, for your explanation. So people or municipalities that applied 1 year, do you hold those over to the next year, or do they have to start all over?
That's a good question, and we got that a lot. We do not hold them over. And so, but they are free to apply again. And sometimes the difference, the ask the second time around may be a little different. Circumstances have changed or whatever. So we don't hold anything over, but we likewise don't foreclose anyone from asking again. We would encourage if anyone has an ask to keep bringing it, because we would, hopefully there will be a yes for them at some point.
I might reiterate an earlier question. At the current funding level, somewhere around where we're currently at, 15 to 19 million, do you think we will ever clean up the list of applications that come in?
Not with the current sunset, no.
Even if that sunset were lifted, as every year we go by, you're going to have a few more apply, is the way it looks.
That would be a good question for someone who does the calculations for projections into the future for financial things, which is not my area of expertise. But what I would say is there will, hopefully, we will be getting on top of these needs. But I think the need is so great, it would be a long period of time before we could ever consider ourselves caught up. But these will be ongoing requests. The cost of supplies, the cost of imports, exports, all of that stuff that's in the mix. The cost of what is being requested now is much more than it would have been had it been requested 15, 20 years ago. Whether we will ever catch up to that, there could be somebody that can do those financial projections. That would not be me. I'd be happy to ask around and see if we could get that. But I think the important answer is, don't let that deter you from making the progress you can make, right? Because just because maybe we can't easily see when will we be done, quote unquote, we may never be done, right? Water is a changing thing. We have climate change that is a changing thing. But these communities desperately need this help. Some is their water even safe to drink, right? A lot of communities it is not, but they can't afford to fix it themselves. We need to help, in my view, might be more than you're asking for, is we need to help everybody we possibly can. I think that's our obligation as a state, from the agency level as well as the legislative level and the administration too. We know these communities need help. We know many times what to do. We just have to find a way to pay for it and help them. So if we can help some but not all, isn't that our obligation? Isn't that our responsibility? So maybe I've overstepped, sir.
Representative Pishney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Connie, for explaining some of this for us. Whether it be water or education or any other matter, what I'm most conscious of is what kind of behavior are we rewarding, are we incenting, and so forth. I did not hear in your outline of all the criteria something that relates to Representative Gardner's question earlier. What if someone has been diligent in keeping the system up, but they just need some additional help to get over the top, versus somebody who has let the system run down thinking, we're going to get this money in a few years through this source, because one incents the right behavior and one does not. So I would be interested in your comments with regard to the criteria. Do we take into account what behavior we're trying to incent versus just helping somebody in need?
I think that's a very fair comment, and I appreciate that. That is worthy of some real conversations with you all. It's a policy question, and that's a toughie, because yes, I completely agree. If we do want to reward maintenance activities, we do want to reward responsible behavior, there's something that just kind of grates on us about rewarding somebody that sort of caused their own problem. But the people that live there probably aren't at fault. The people that live in Caney weren't responsible for all the neglect for many years, and there was neglect. So we need to think a little deeper, because the people that maybe made those decisions to defer maintenance, well, should people who are suffering the consequences that had nothing to do with those decisions suffer the pain of that? These are complicated questions, so I'm not trying to give you a pat answer, but it does behoove us to find a way to incentivize the right kind of behavior and forward thinking and proper maintenance and proper responsible behavior along the way.
Thank you, and I appreciate your comment about the people who did not have control over the situation. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
I obviously am negligent as a chairman. Freshman, we should have had a lot more presentations earlier on the details that are situation we're currently in. Those of you that have been on the committee several years have been through these discussions. There's a lot of YouTube time out there if you've got a spare 120 hours this weekend. It's snow day tomorrow. You can go back and catch up on a lot of these things. Yeah. But a lot of these issues have been discussed and discussed. Wendy, thank you for your testimony, and Connie, thank you for answering some of our questions that come up.
Thank you very much. And at the Water Office, we're also very happy to just meet one-on-one if you ever just want to have a conversation and say, what's all this about, or want a little bit more context or background. We're happy to do that.
Next, we have Darren Martin with the Kansas Rural Water Association. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. My name is Darren Martin. I'm with Kansas Rural Water Association. We're a nonprofit that was formed in 1966 to provide training and technical assistance and advocacy for Kansas's water and wastewater systems of all size. We mainly work with very small systems. Membership support is 750 cities, rural water and public wholesale water districts. And we're here in support of House Bill 2113, specifically the additional funding of water technical assistance funding and the water projects grant. Ms. Owens did a fair job of explaining what those programs are, but I'm here to mainly express the importance of what those funds do for small rural water districts and cities. So there's kind of a conveyor belt for funding, and when you decide, your water district decides you need a project, it sort of depends on the timing of that project on if you get funding or not, because all of the different funding programs. And this program from the Water Office is in addition to a lot of other funding sources for water and wastewater utilities. There are SRF funds and USDA rural development funds. So there are other funding sources that water and wastewater utilities go for. But with reduced SRF and federal funding uncertainty from Washington, this state funding program is probably going to be of more importance, I would say, in the future. And as far as the questions about how much need is there and how long will it take, that's sort of up to EPA, because every time a new regulation comes out, specifically right now, we're looking at lead and copper. Lots and lots of water systems and mainly municipalities are being tasked with replacing entire distribution systems because of lead and galvanized requiring replacement, meaning that it's downstream of lead or at some time was, or the water system doesn't have any idea what was originally there. So if you don't know, EPA says that that's lead. There are a lot of real needs. The other big need on the horizon is PFAS, which a lot of you guys maybe have heard PFAS in the news. But that's going to be a real concern, to remove PFAS from drinking water and then be able to do something with it in the wastewater plant is going to be a real concern. There are applicants from all parts of the state, and yesterday in the Ag Committee, a couple systems specifically were discussed, like Pretty Prairie. Pretty Prairie just built a $2.2 million water treatment plant in order to remove nitrate because of federal regulations. And so Pretty Prairie, 2.2 million and 285 metered connections comes out to, just the principal is like $7,800 each connection. That doesn't include any debt service or interest payments over the 20 or 30-year life of that loan. And then Representative Blex mentioned Chautauqua, that they had a chili feed to help raise funds to help their infrastructure, and Chautauqua has 77 connections. So even a small project, and nowadays, unfortunately, a small project is $500,000, considered a small project. Over 78 connections, that becomes unaffordable. And water rates are the only other way to pay for this, other than some of these funding sources. There was a question about some of the specific projects that were funded last year, And I know of a few. I've got a staff member, Lorraine Lowry, who lives and breathes this stuff, funding, and she really is going for it. So she sent me a couple of the specifics, and the ones that I know about are Wakefield. Wakefield is on Milford Reservoir, which has a lot of blue-green algae problems, or contributes to those. And Wakefield's lagoon system dumps right into that lake. And so they are using this funding to add an additional lagoon cell. So hopefully they can go non-discharging and not discharge wastewater into Milford Lake. And then one of the other ones is Keats, and I guess those are both same region. Keats had private systems, so everybody had their own septic system, and all these septic systems are failing and leaking nutrients into Wildcat Creek, which goes right through Manhattan. And so this funding is being used to create a community sewer system at Keats. And so a lot of these small systems, while there are a lot of other funding sources, some of these small systems, the projects are getting to be so large, small systems, even if they raised water bills, could not raise a water bill enough or a sewer bill to pay for a lot of these projects without this kind of assistance. It's well known that grants are, if you hire a grant writer and you use the buzzwords that they're looking for, your score will be higher. And so one suggestion I have for Representative Pishney's suggestion of can we somehow, can we award people that are providing their own funding? And I would suggest that perhaps you make that a priority in the points system, how we're grading these applications. If a water or wastewater system has alternative funding sources to be able to match some of these funds, they get a higher score. So in conclusion, Kansas Rural Water Association supports this bill, specifically the increase in funding of those two grant programs through the Water Office. I thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you see appropriate.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Darren. That's all I have listed for oral proponents. You'll notice in your files, you also have written proponent testimony from Randy Stuckey with Green and Feed and Cara and Renew Kansas, Hardy Howard with the City of Waukene, Shahira Stafford with the Kansas Cooperative Council, Dan Merkin with the City of Edgerton, Ken Askren with the Kansas Farm Bureau. Are there any neutral testimonies to come forward? Seeing none, are there any opponent testimonies to come forward? Seeing none. I will also tell the committee, if you look through your file folder today, you'll see some additional information in there. One is about the special funds, the Treasurer's Water Investment Funds. For some of the newer members, in 2023, we sent $50 million to the Kansas Treasurer's Office to retire the contracts with the Corps of Engineers on the last two federal reservoirs, Perry and Milford. We had funding at that time. We thought it was prudent to do that. The Treasurer's Office has been able to invest that. At the time we sent $50 million over, that fund is currently with investments worth about $55,800,000. Those two contracts, one of which comes due in 2032, the Water Office is authorized to make a call for that capacity of water for municipals at any time. We don't see the need to do that immediately. We are gathering some additional interest rate. It's called arbitrage. The interest rate on those contracts was about 2.6, 2.8%, and you can see we're making 4.6, 4.9. The treasurer called me yesterday, and in our conversations, he has those laddered in these two 6-month treasury funds, treasury bills. Every 3 months, one of the two becomes available. You'll see one will come available on May 15th of 2025, and it's the smaller one, but it's in the $25 million range. The bill we're currently working on, that is part of the funding that I was hoping to utilize. In the last 3 months, I believe the bill has passed. I need to talk to some people over in the Senate, but there was a federal bill to change the interest on those Corps of Engineer contracts from compound interest to simple interest. That should save us, if you went to the end of those contracts, the first one in 2032 would be about $41 million total. So our $50 million investment's been making interest, and if the federal bill is fully authorized, then we'll save quite a bit. That's been my hope and potential funding for some of the things that we might increase the water fund budget with for this current year. I'm trying to do everything I can so we don't have new and additional fundings. But the 2013 bill also sunsets in June 30th of 2028, the same time as the bill passed in the 2302 bill. You freshmen hopefully will be sitting here in the next 2 years and determining whether that needs to be expended or extended or expanded. There was conversation yesterday in the House Ag Committee why all those dusty plans didn't work. They were never funded, is my simple answer. They were never, action wasn't taken on them. That's my purpose for trying to help with this 2113 bill. If you go through your packet, you'll also, I'm not sure if we got it in there, Tony, recommendations from the governor on what she wanted to do. We've already, it's what? It's on the S drive. We've also made some recommendations to the Ag Budget Committee that have already gone through quite a ways. All these things can be reconciled in the budget over the next several weeks. So if this bill passes, that's one thing. If it doesn't pass, a lot of those things will be stripped out or reconsidered in a different manner. Does anybody have any further questions for the conferees in the room? I want to thank Connie. I put her on a spot, but I thought it was a good time to get some good information for you folks. Seeing none, I will close the hearing on House Bill 2113. We hope to work this on Thursday, and we also have another bill. I think I said in our packet there was the potential amendment on this bill. Anything else for the good of the committee? You can bring that up, sure. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to clarify, the other bills we'll be working on Thursday. Are you also planning to work House Bill 2112 on Thursday? That's the water.
2112 and 2113 on Thursday. Seeing no further comments, we are adjourned.